This is the BMW iX3, and compared to the company's first mass-produced EV, the i3 hatchback, the iX3 looks a little more tame. Now, it's BMW's answer to the likes of the Audi e-tron, the Mercedes EQC, and Jaguar I-Pace. And compared to the Jaguar and the Audi at least, it doesn't look quite as interesting. However, being a BMW, it's all about the drive, and today we're going to see what the iX3 is all about. But before we go any further, why not give us a thumbs up if you like what you see, and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. When BMW launched its electric cars back in 2013, people were blown away by their design because the i3 looked like a concept car that you could actually go out and buy. However, the iX3 is a lot more conventional, and the reason is because it's based on the piston-powered X3 SUV. Now, there are some differences, although they're quite subtle. The big ones are you have a predominantly blanked out grille, although there is a small vent underneath here, and that's about it really, other than a blue ring around the BMW badge. Now, it's worth noting that this is actually the pre-facelift car. If you go and buy an iX3 today, it's going to look a little bit different. There's a new headlight design. You also have a completely reworked front bumper as well, which looks a lot more aggressive and M-sporty. Now, if you put an iX3 and an X3 side by side, you'll notice that the iX3 actually sits a little bit lower to the ground than the piston-powered car, and that's because being an EV, it's heavier, quite a lot heavier. This thing weighs in at over 2.2 tons, whereas on the piston-powered car, you're looking at something that's a little bit less than 2 tons. So it's a bit on the hefty side. There are 4 different paint options to choose from as well, and none of them are particularly imaginative, and it all boils down to basically metallic black, metallic dark grey, metallic white, and metallic blue, none of which come at any cost. But unfortunately, what does come at a cost is the iX3 itself. Another seamless segue into pricing, and it all kicks off at £59,730 for the entry-level M Sport. But if you pay another £2,000, you can go for the M Sport Pro. Now, mechanically, they're identical, but the main differences are you get some gloss black elements on the outside, you also get larger wheels, 20 inches instead of 19, and there's also a suite of semi-autonomous driving modes, among some changes on the inside, which I'll get to in a bit. But we've got plenty of deals on new iX3s over at yesauto.co.uk, so you don't have to spend full price if you don't want to. There's no frunk or front boot under the bonnet of the iX3, you just get this cover, and if you lift it up you can see there's a massive void underneath it, so BMW could have put a front boot in there, but they didn't. So why is there such a huge void under the bonnet of the iX3? Well, it's only got one motor and it's over the rear axle. It produces 286 horsepower and 400 Newton meters of torque, which is good for a 0 to 62 time of 6.8 seconds, which admittedly doesn't sound all that fast, but is about on par with the Q4 e-tron and EQC. Now, the motor itself is actually a current excited synchronous motor, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but it doesn't use rare metals or magnets and is therefore better for the environment. Now, the motor is connected up to an 80 kilowatt hour battery, which offers up a range of up to 285 miles, which is better than the e-tron and also the EQC, although it is beaten by the Jaguar I-Pace. It's worth noting that range takes a slight dip on the M Sport Pro down to 282 miles, which isn't a big difference, but there are no actual different configurations for batteries and motors. There's only one battery and one motor option, so if you want a bit more range or a bit more power, you need to get one with a good old-fashioned piston-powered engine. And when it comes to charging up, you can go from 10 to 80% battery in around about 30 minutes. And that's because the iX3 accepts charging speeds of up to 150 kilowatts. All you have to do is find a suitable charger, which isn't that easy in the UK currently in 2021. Now, you can also get 60 miles of range in around about 10 minutes. So if you don't have 30 minutes to kill, you can get a bit of range and get on your way to that important business meeting. All iX3s come with an electrically operated tailgate, and when you utilize it, you'll open up 510 litres of storage, which is actually 40 litres less than what you get on the regular X3. And that's mainly because the batteries are stored at the back of the car, but 40 litres isn't all that much. There's still plenty of space back here, and you have a relatively low load lip as well. Now we've got some charging cables here, and you might be wondering, is there nowhere else to put them? And the answer is, well, sort of. There is a relatively deep bin underneath the boot floor, but that's also taken up by a tyre repair kit as well as more cables. So you're going to have to just leave these in the boot if you want to take them with you. There's also some netting as well if you want to divide stuff up. So the iX3 really is suited for family living. Inside, the iX3's cabin is largely the same as the regular X3, although there are some subtle differences to tell you that you're in the electric car, such as the iX3 name on a metal plaque in the center console, the BMW i name on the door sills, as well as blue highlights on the gear selector and steering wheel. You also get bespoke graphics on the driver's display and central infotainment screen to reflect the fact that you're in an EV. This model comes with the cream leather interior, and the seats feel really very nice. However, I will say that the cream does highlight some cheaper plastics kind of around here on the center console, which the black interior would do a better job of covering up. Back to that infotainment display, it is a little bit on the small side compared with rivals, but it's dead simple to control, especially with this little rotary dial down here in the center console. There are also gesture controls, which is a real pain for someone like me who uses hand gestures quite a lot. So if I turn like this, the volume goes up, but we can't play you any music, so we're going to have to cut that out in editing. Now, if you buy the brand new facelifted model, you also get an updated nav system, which will show you how far you can go with the remaining range, which is a feature that came over from the BMW i3. And if you go for the M Sport Pro package, you'll get acoustic glass, which is a little bit thicker than what you get on the standard car, plus sound effects crafted by legendary composer Hans Zimmer. The back of the iX3 is actually quite impressive. So I'm just under 6 foot, but legroom isn't all that bad. It's not super spacious, but I think if you were just over 6 foot, you'd still be able to fit in here without it being too much of a squeeze. And the same goes for headroom, even though we've got a panoramic roof, and that usually cuts into headroom quite a bit, but it's very spacious in the back of the iX3. There's also quite a lot of creature comforts back here as well. So we've got an armrest with not only a couple of cup holders, but you also get quite a big storage tray as well. There are a couple of USB-C ports and climate controls back here to mess around with too. But the thing that I find the most impressive is it's actually really comfortable back here. A lot of electric cars really struggle with getting the back seats right because the way that the batteries kind of are positioned, it means that you can often feel like your legs are really far up in the air because the seat is positioned really low down to the floor. But in the iX3, they've got it pretty much just right. So when you're sat still, the iX3 feels pretty much like a regular X3, but it's when you're out on the road that things start to feel really quite different. Now I want to address something I mentioned earlier of where the iX3 didn't sound like it was a very powerful car, but when you put it in sport mode, it really gets a move on. It's not gonna tear your face off. It doesn't feel like the kind of performance that you get from, say, a Tesla Model 3, but this thing still feels like a really quick car. And can you hear the Hans Zimmer style sound effects? They're very quiet, admittedly, but it makes the iX3 sound more futuristic, and it's not trying to mimic a petrol engine car, which some other EVs have started doing recently, which I find a little bit strange. But yes, if you're worried that the iX3 isn't going to be quite as punchy as you would have hoped, well, it really does feel like a very quick car and does a great job of disguising that 2.2 ton weight. But I'm going to whack it into Eco Pro now. There's also a comfort mode, but I feel like you kind of would bypass that to either have it in its most efficient setting or its fastest. And when you do put it in Eco Pro, it definitely feels a little bit slower, but the most important thing is that you're starting to conserve energy. And that brings me on to real world range. Now, when I set off this morning, I had 200 miles left in the battery, according to the dash here. And I've traveled 55 miles on a real mix of dual carriageway, town driving, and also through some rural roads. And I now have 86 miles left, which is a little concerning because I have 55 miles to get home and I'm really hoping that it can make it. But that number's a bit of a red herring because it's estimated range rather than real world. So the one that I care about the most is this one here, the miles per kilowatt hour, and I've averaged 2.9, which, with some quick maths that I did in my head and definitely not on a calculator, means that this car can do 232 miles on a single charge, which is quite a bit off the 285 that's claimed. However, it is worth noting that that's just my trip today. After a slightly longer drive, I was averaging around about 3, which brings it up a little bit, but not a lot. There is regenerative braking though, so when you're driving along, you can knock the drive selector into B, which means that when you lift off the accelerator, the brakes will gradually apply and recoup some of that energy and put it back into the battery. Now, it doesn't have a feeling of like you're really putting the brakes on, and you can't adjust the aggressiveness of the feature using paddles on the back of the steering wheel. However, it's nice to know that it's there. You're not really going to be able to do much one pedal driving, but when you do lift off, at least you have that peace of mind knowing that you're topping up your battery a little bit, which is certainly helping me at the moment because the longer I film this, the more anxious I get about being able to make it home without having to recharge. Back to the things that make the iX3 great, and it is just overall the way it drives. This is one of the best driving electric cars I've been in, and it is because BMWs tend to be inherently sporty. That being said, it does feel very comfortable. We do have adaptive dampers in here, which means that the ride can be adjusted. So if it's in a sporty mode, it can be a little bit firmer and, you know, kind of really keep the car flat in the corners. Or as I've got it at the moment in eco mode or in comfort, it can just slacken off a little bit and things can become a bit more comfortable. It is a really well sorted product. Sure, it's not as exciting to look at as the i3 or the hybrid i8, but BMW seems to be shifting its focus to electrifying its entire lineup rather than kind of treating EVs as a separate business. And so the iX3 doesn't really feel like a novelty. It just feels like a really good electric SUV. Now, I'll need to wait and see what something like a Tesla Model Y is like in comparison to this, but compared to its rivals, I think the iX3 is the most satisfying to drive and on paper also has the better range, unless you go for a Jaguar.